You can be surrounded by people and still feel strangely alone. You can gain followers, friends, networks, connections, recognition, and still feel emotionally disconnected from all of it. You can achieve goals you once dreamed about and then quietly sit there wondering, why doesn't this feel the way I imagined? This is often the experience of Ketu in the 11th house, and this placement is far deeper than simply problems with friendships, because the 11th house is the house of social belonging. Friends, networks, communities, audience, recognition, dreams for the future, achievements, social validation, group identity, financial gains, the feeling of being connected to something larger than yourself. It is the house that asks, where do you fit in this world? And Ketu enters this house carrying detachment. Ketu is separation, past life residue, spiritual exhaustion, inner emptiness, isolation, disconnection from worldly attachment. So when Ketu sits in the 11th house, the soul often comes into this life already tired of superficial social fulfillment. That is why many of you with this placement may have experienced something strange repeatedly, being around people but not truly feeling connected to them. You may have acquaintances easily. People may know you. You may even be socially liked, but deep inside, something still feels distant, as if part of you never fully enters the group emotionally. And honestly, this can become painful because human beings naturally want belonging. But Ketu in the 11th house often creates the feeling of standing slightly outside social circles emotionally, even when physically included. Sometimes this begins early in life. You may have feel different from classmates, different even when trying to fit in. Maybe you observed people more than fully relaxed around them. Maybe you always felt slightly disconnected from group dynamics or social trends. And over time, this creates a habit of emotional distance. Not necessarily because you dislike people, but because your soul struggles to find fulfillment in surface level connection. This placement often creates people who outgrow friendships repeatedly. You may become close to someone for a period, then suddenly feel detached, not because anything dramatic happened, but because Ketu creates emotional separation once the karmic lesson feels complete. And this pattern can confuse both you and others. People may think you become cold, distant, unavailable, but internally you may simply feel disconnected without understanding why. Because Ketu dissolves attachment silently. The 11th house also rules dreams and long term desires, and this is where the placement becomes emotionally complex. Many Ketu in the 11th house individuals spend years chasing goals they believed would finally make them feel fulfilled: recognition, success, money, popularity, validation, achievements. But when those things finally arrive, the emotional satisfaction often feels temporary or strangely empty. That realization can feel heartbreaking because part of you truly believed, when I reach this point, I'll finally feel complete. But Ketu teaches something difficult. External achievement cannot permanently fill inner emptiness. And because of this, many people with this placement experience periods of disillusionment with social life itself. You may begin noticing how performative many interactions feel: the fake closeness, the hidden competition, the conditional support, the way people gather around success but disappear during emotional difficulty. And once you see these patterns clearly, it becomes hard to fully trust group belonging the same way others do. That does not mean you are antisocial. In fact, some people with Ketu in the 11th house become highly visible socially. Large networks, online audiences, public recognition. But internally, they may still feel emotionally detached from the attention they receive. Because Ketu creates a strange contradiction. The experience exists externally, but emotional attachment to it weakens internally. This placement can also create karmic lessons involving friendships. Friends entering suddenly, leaving suddenly, betrayals, emotional distance, feeling unsupported by groups during important life periods. Sometimes the person becomes the giver in friendships while secretly feeling emotionally unseen themselves. And after enough disappointment, the soul begins becoming selective, very selective. You may stop caring about popularity altogether. Quality begins mattering more than quantity. Realness begins mattering more than attention. And this is where the deeper wisdom of this placement slowly appears. Because Ketu in the 11th house eventually pushes the soul away from external validation and toward authentic connection, not social performance, not belonging for appearances, real emotional resonance. Many people with this placement also feel detached from mainstream ambitions. You may try to chase society's definition of success for a while, but eventually feel exhausted by it. Because your soul wants meaning, not just applause. And interestingly, whenever Ketu sits in the 11th house, Rahu automatically sits in the 5th house. This is extremely important. Because while Ketu creates detachment from group identity and external validation, Rahu in the 5th house creates intense hunger for personal expression, creativity, romance, individuality, passion, recognition, and emotional intensity. So internally, the soul moves away from crowds and toward personal authenticity. You may slowly stop trying to be accepted by everyone. Instead, you begin craving spaces where you can genuinely express yourself, your creativity, your emotions, your individuality. This is why many Ketu in the 11th house individuals eventually become emotionally fulfilled not through large groups but through a few deeply meaningful connections and creative self expression. The soul becomes tired of collective noise. It wants something personal, something emotionally alive, and emotionally, this placement can create loneliness, especially during younger years. The feeling that people know you but do not truly know you. The feeling of being emotionally separate even inside communities. And sometimes this leads to withdrawal. You may stop trying socially after repeated disappointments or become extremely independent emotionally. But healing begins when you realize something important. You are never meant to lose yourself trying to belong everywhere. That was never your soul's path. Ketu in the 11th house slowly teaches the difference between attention and connection, between popularity and intimacy, between being surrounded and being understood. And once this understanding deepens, your relationships change. You stop forcing yourself into spaces where your soul feels disconnected. You stop chasing validation from crowds. You become more intentional with energy, more emotionally honest, and the friendships that remain become far more meaningful. One beautiful thing about mature Ketu in the 11th house individuals is this: when they connect genuinely, they connect deeply. Because they no longer seek people merely to avoid loneliness, they seek truth in connection, and that creates emotionally powerful bonds. This placement also carries spiritual depth because after enough social disappointment, the soul begins understanding impermanence in human connections. People change, groups change, recognition fades, public attention shifts. And once this is understood deeply, attachment softens, not into bitterness, into wisdom. You stop expecting external validation to define your worth, and strangely, this often makes you more authentic socially because you are no longer performing constantly for acceptance. You become calmer, more real, more yourself, and perhaps that is the hidden gift of Ketu in the 11th house. It removes false belonging so you can eventually discover real belonging, not the kind built on image, status, or usefulness, but the kind where your soul no longer feels the need to pretend in order to stay connected. And for many of you, that may become one of the most healing experiences of your entire life.